Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the ROKER RAPPORT podcast. You are joining us mere hours after the announcement that the EFL have voted in favour of curtailing the Sky Bet League One season and thus of course condemning Sunderland to finish outside the top 50 teams in English football for the first time in the club's illustrious 141-year history. Yeah, so if you want to continue to listen to this scintillating barrel of laughs, which no doubt will transpire based on this topic, then we've assembled a panel to talk about this monumental mismanagement of Sunderland AFC, who are, of course, now looking forward to a third consecutive season in League One. I'm your host, Alex, and joining me this evening is Phil Smith from the Sunderland Echo. How you doing, Phil?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're also joined by Dave Rose from the Red and White Army. How you doing, Dave?
Good, thanks, under the circumstances, I suppose.
As good as you're getting.
Exactly.
And finally, we have another ROKER reporter, John Stacey. How you doing, John?
Yeah, not bad, Alex. Thanks for that weird introduction. That was
I tried to do something witty with that, but as you can clearly tell, I failed quite miserably. Obviously, the hot topic, which is going to underpin everything we talk about for the rest of today, is the fact that the season has come to an abrupt end, a premature one. Was it overall a fair decision? We'll start with you, John. What did you make of it?
I think the most unfair part about it was the whole back and forth delay, kind of sat in limbo, not sure what's happening, lots of hope here and there, lots of conjecture about what might happen, what couldn't happen, what could happen, etc. But ultimately, I think when I've had half an hour or so to think about it this evening, I think, to be fair, when you think about our form across the season, I guess you've kind of got to go with kind of fairness beyond if you're completing a season now as it is and what's happened and how we've ended up. You know, I couldn't see us pulling up trees, and if we had a chance to play the rest of the season, if I'm completely honest. So yes, I think up until today I was kind of clinging on, thinking, well, if it does start again, you never know, we might have like an epic sort of great escape kind of style, clambering up the leagues rather than down. But just looking at the team, looking at the way we've been playing and the players, some of the players looking to leave, etc., I just couldn't see it happening, couldn't see us getting out of it. So all that said and done, I think personally, from personal opinion, you know, without thinking about next season, without thinking about what's happening in the near future, I think the decision that's been made is pretty fair overall.
Certainly there's a case to be made that the whole back and forth that the teams in the bottom two divisions of the EFL have had to experience, it hasn't been particularly brilliant. But I suppose as well you could maybe ask some questions about whether or not it's fair, maybe to play a bit devil's advocate with you, John. If you look at some of the teams maybe in League One, I mean, overall, I would say the vast majority on the face of it do seem to have a fairly fair resolution from the points per game table.
Honestly, I wanted to strip it all back and it be rated on, you know, biggest club or biggest following or something, and then get flying up. But I just think, you know, the ups and downs and the seesaws and who gets what and what the points per game was going to be, whether it's weighted, non-weighted and all that, I think it's all a bit of a moot point personally. I think that there's metrics that you can use left, right and centre, and there's science behind it left, right and centre. From a Sunderland point of view, yeah, I think it's a fair decision. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have a question about perhaps some of the other teams in the divisions. I mean, obviously Sunderland, I would say, and I would echo John's sentiments. I think it is fair given our performances across the season. The PPG does reflect that, I think, quite accurately. What about, say, your teams like Wycombe, who had a very good start to the season but fell away, or say Tranmere, who had a poor season in the main, then got some momentum and sort of pushed back up the table? Is it perhaps a little bit unfair from them?
I think it possibly is, because the points per game thing doesn't take into account form or last minute surges of runs of games where you're going to win in streak, and I think every fan hopes they're going to do that, don't they? I mean, we're all optimists at heart, even Sunderland fans. You think, you know, maybe you can turn it around, and obviously the points per game, whilst the logic to it takes away that unpredictability of sport. But we are where we are, and obviously it's clubs have voted the way they have for whatever reason they've done that, and I guess there'll be a bit of self-interest for all clubs, including Sunderland, how they voted on that. We've got to go with the majority. I think a lot of Sunderland fans are gutted that we haven't had that chance to try to finish with a flourish and go promotion either whether we're automatically got to get into the playoffs. But at the same time, I sort of think we are where we are. I'm not sure we deserve to go. And also, I think when you're getting out of this league, you want to be doing it with a bit of swagger, or at least with a bit more purpose, befitting of the club our size anyway, because the Championship is a bigger step up from League One than the Premier League is from the Championship. You've got to go all guns blazing if you're not going to just drop back down again.
No, absolutely. We have a question for you, Phil. Obviously, with regards to the nature of how this has all unfolded, we understand that the Sunderland CEO, Jim Rodwell, spoke with the Echo recently about his decisions to end the season. Could you give us some possible insights into how exactly that went?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, to be fair, Sunderland's stance has been pretty clear for a little while, hasn't it? That they wanted to play on. Obviously, there's self-interest in there, as been with every football club who've kind of been weighing up what to do next. But I think Sunderland as well, and Jim Rodwell kind of expressed, and I think I've felt all the way along that, if the Championship and the Premier League are getting back to playing, then League One should be doing everything they can do as well. Because ultimately, if you set the precedent that you're not going to play kind of behind closed doors, then the next question is, when will next season start? It could be quite a long time before we're looking at that, if that's the precedent you set. But I think the division, as we've seen in the last few weeks, has been pretty divided. You've got the kind of clubs, the slightly bigger clubs who have reasons why they want to play on, and then the slightly smaller clubs who the costs of testing were going to be an absolutely huge issue. So I think in terms of the process itself, I think Sunderland and the clubs who want to play on, I think probably the main frustration has been that by the time we finally got around to holding the vote today, there was no way the League One season could resume anyway, because the EFL had already set a deadline for July the 31st, and they'd already said that it would take around 50 days to finish the season. So, even if clubs had voted to resume the season today, it wouldn't have been possible to do it. So I think that's probably where the main frustration lies, is that we got to a point where the vote seemed a bit immaterial, really. And I think that's a bigger issue than potentially the points per game. But I just, from my own perspective, I completely agree with the fact that I think had Sunderland, got another win somewhere down the line and we're going up second on points per game, yeah, it would be exciting looking ahead to going into the Championship, but there'd be a lot of concern there as well. And I don't feel Sunderland are one of the clubs who've been massively hard done by, to be honest, by the points per game. Tranmere certainly have been. I think you could put Peterborough in that category as well, but I can't really hand on heart say that I think Sunderland deserved it, or that I would be overly optimistic about them going up to the Championship at the moment.
No, and I think that comes back somewhat to what Dave said about going up with a bit of swagger. I mean, certainly the last time Sunderland went up through the back door back in 1990, when they obviously lost to Swindon in the final, but then because of Swindon's financial irregularities, the Sunderland got up by default. I think it would feel like an even more watered down version of that, and there would perhaps then be a concern that if Sunderland are going up through, such peculiar, unorthodox circumstances in which they don't really prove their credentials as much as they would in a conventional season, that perhaps they wouldn't be as well suited to the Championship. So that perhaps combines a bit of what you've both said there, Dave and Phil.
I think that is the case, definitely. And smiled a bit remembering the whole Swindon thing as well. And we wouldn't have had the advantage of it undoing the mags a little bit and kissing them as well this time around.
Yeah.
That's quite good. But yeah, I think, yes, I think it would have been strange. I think now we're put out of our misery and know where we stand. If our owners are still trying to sell the club, maybe it allows for some movement there, because at least there isn't those unknowns now on that front. So maybe there's maybe it'll be a blessing in disguise, and that get things moving a little bit. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully. Phil, do we know what proposal the club submitted to the EFL to resume the season?
Well, there were only two kind of options on the table. One was just to play on behind closed doors, as the Championship are doing, and then the alternative was kind of what to do in the event of the season being finished. So the only alternative to what's happened, which was points per game in the end, was this Tranmere Rovers proposal, which was that a margin of error would be applied. So essentially what they've done is gone past the last three seasons and compared what tally point teams have at this stage of the season compared to the end. The upshot of that would have been, surprise, surprise, they would have survived, and there would have only been two teams gone down. But it also would have meant that Sunderland would theoretically have been invited to take part in an extended playoff position. But of course, there was never going to be the support in League One for that, because the teams who currently knew they were going to be in the playoffs on a points per game system are never going to vote for that, because why would you reduce your chances of promotion from 1 in 4 to 1 in 7 or 8? So unfortunately, it was one of those. Tranmere obviously felt, they had to fight for their fans and what have you, but I'm sure Sunderland would have supported that, but I don't think it was ever really going to get the numbers. So when it came down to it, it was merely a case of play on or curtail it. And unfortunately, playing on, I think they would have lost the vote 3 weeks ago, but it would have been a lot closer than it was today, just because everybody could look at the calendar and just see that this didn't work. There was no way League One was coming back.
No, I think that the longer that we've had to leave it, like you said there, Phil, the less feasible or sustainable it becomes for the average League One club. I mean, Sunderland living off the last of its Premier League money might be one of those in the privileged position where we could say, yeah, we can play out these fixtures, but ultimately you look at clubs like Gillingham and, had they have had to maybe field some more games behind closed doors with no revenue, it just wasn't going to be possible. What you say there, Phil, brings me to another question about obviously teams voting in favour of themselves. I think it incurs a bit of a moral issue. I mean, a number of chairmen and chief executives, ours included, suggested that some of the clubs perhaps detected some moral quandaries regarding the resuming of the season, depending on where the position was in the table. Is there a case to be made maybe that, I'll go to you here, John, we've not heard from you in a while. Should this vote, yeah. Is there possibly a case to be made that the decision to vote should have been taken away from the clubs and left in the hands of the EFL, or should that element of democracy have been retained despite the votes probably being fueled by just personal preference?
That's a tricky one, that's a really tricky one.
That's why I gave you it.
My first initial spur thought, without even having a deep think, was that maybe it should have been taken away from people who are going to have self-interest and have the moral quandary, and just have that taken away, so that a decision is made based on kind of a neutral person or someone without a personal opinion towards it. I guess then the secondary thought of it is that, we're supposedly living in a democratic world. We're supposedly living in a world where people should all be given a chance to have their say. And in that, without getting too political, every league should have a say. Every club and every league should have a say about every single decision. And that's why all the chairmen and CAOs are brought into most decisions. They have regular meetings with the league and things like that. And obviously, quite a lot of the listeners will have lived through times where they didn't get a say, and it was just kind of the league dictated what happened when, and it was all about money, and it was all about different situations where the clubs were shafted, for want of a better word. And it was a case of, I guess, going back to the start then, really, of what I've just said, and said, everybody should look after their own interests. They should be thinking about how they can keep the club running and make a decision based on that, especially if they're mid-table, or they've got nothing to play for and they can't keep they can't keep running as a club with playing behind closed doors for no reason, so or to help other people to potentially get promoted. It's without giving really much of an answer there, that's basically my thoughts. I think that maybe from a person, I think from a human perspective, this has been the right decision, the right process. From a making it easier and quicker and taking the moral quandaries out of it for people to make those decisions, I think the decision would have been made a month ago, surely, if it was just somebody making a decision based on whatever they think, because they don't have a vested interest in any particular club. So, maybe selfishly, purely because the worst part about this has been in limbo for me, I'd have liked it to have been decided ages ago by somebody just to say, look, all of you lot, shut up, this is what's happening. So
I think certainly in hindsight it would remove a lot of the complications we've had. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Dave? Anything you agree with or disagree with there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complexities with running the league, especially the EFL, the sheer number of clubs and the sheer variation in the size of clubs. And the way it's set up is obviously they have the rules at the start of each season, the rules of competition. I think if anyone had been dictatorial around it, I think, first of all, I just don't think it's possible, but they would have been setting themselves up for lots of legal challenges. So as painful as the process might have been, I do feel a bit for the EFL. It's a difficult position to be in, I think, and obviously unprecedented as well. We've never seen this before.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose as well, I mean, if I was to maybe answer my own question, when I look at it, I'm only really just thinking this now, but if the teams aren't voting for themselves, then what are they actually voting for? I mean, maybe the knee-jerk response might be they're voting for the league to be fair, but then also there's only so much the form can really tell you is fair. I mean, all you have to do is look at Sunderland's, 3 or 4 great escapes towards the end of their stay in the Premier League. If the season had ended 3/4 of the way in because of a global pandemic, then we would have been bottom every time, wouldn't we? But then obviously at the end of those seasons, when they had played out, would finish 16th with 38 points without fail. So, really...
and also, like, if you look at how it's been framed as well, a bit like, well, it's a sport and results shouldn't be decided in a boardroom. And of course, we all agree with that general principle. But I'm not so sure we would have been putting those sound bites out if we were top of the league clear and it benefited us the season ending.
No, well, that's it, isn't it? I don't think there'd be many different noises being made if Sunderland, for example, let's say they'd beaten Bolton those 2 times and they'd beat Fleetwood away that one time, and then we've got what's that going to be? 6 more points? Yeah, 6 more points. I think, unless my maths has failed me. No, it hasn't. Thank God. But yeah, so say you got 6 more points, and all of a sudden, you're one of the 2 teams you're one of the 3 teams, that's going up. Well, no, one of the 2 that's going up. That's how League One works. Yeah, all of a sudden, that's a whole different situation, isn't it? Case in point, if we benefit, then I don't think we'd be hearing an awful lot.
I think you might have had 2 or 3, maybe 4 clubs within that moral quandary bracket where they can probably sustain the club regardless. They're not bothered about how it ends. So they're probably thinking, right, well, what's fair for the rest? The people who are having a problem, having an issue, either relegation or promotion battle. And they're probably thinking, well, how should I vote? Because it doesn't really matter to me which way it goes. I can play the rest of the games. But this is League One. This isn't the Premier League. This isn't people with massive bank accounts. So they are probably few and far between those that had a moral quandary, because I can pretty much guarantee that out of the 24 clubs, you've got probably upwards of 20, almost 20 that just are definitely looking out for themselves. 23 actually, with no Berry. But yeah, it's the case. It was 23, wasn't it? Even my maths is playing up now, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
but yeah, just the other point there, about playing the game and versus a boardroom. Again, it's just kind of like, it's just making me go back to the question you just asked me and just think maybe we should have just played on and everybody should have played, because Dave's got me thinking of nostalgia and I don't want someone to make the decision for me anymore. So
yeah, it's like that, isn't it? It's almost, you don't want, I think, as Dave initially said there, it would have been a lot less politically convenient for the EFL to have just made the decision, even if that decision had been the most agreeable one overall, because ultimately the clubs who would be the ones who don't benefit from that, if, say, for example, the EFL just went, right, PPG table, that's sorted, everyone shut up, that's what we're doing, then obviously Tranmere would immediately be up in arms. There'd be a real tirade against the EFL, because given the circumstances, form is probably the most egalitarian thing you can decide on. But ultimately, it isn't the be all and end all, as we've seen. But anyway, speaking of the EFL's decision making, it isn't just the case that it's the lower divisions necessarily that are struggling to have reached these conclusions. I mean, the German third division, for example, the Drei Liga, was able to resume, and teams were and are playing out their remaining games. So I'll go to you, Phil, for this one, because you obviously spoke about it previously. But Emma, why do you think the EFL never entertained the idea of restarting League One earlier? Like, why? What? I mean, obviously, it was a frustration for the clubs that the process was drawn out to the point where only one of the 2 options became valid realistically as of today. But what do you think was all the umming and ahhing? What was, from your perspective, what was taking the time?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think the reason why a restart was always unlikely was because I think the main issue, to be honest, from League One's club's perspectives was financial rather than necessarily than health and safety. The EFL had put in pretty comprehensive protocols for getting people back to the training grounds, which Championship clubs have adopted. So I think that was a hurdle that had sort of half been cleared. I think it was a case of finances from playing behind closed doors, and also finances of testing. The cost of testing was an absolutely massive issue. I can't stress this enough. It was very, very, very difficult to sell to teams in mid-table with little to play for, or teams that don't have a huge kind of income that they should be shelling out on testing to finish the season. And without testing, you can't get the players back into training. And if you can't get the players back into training, then you're at least 3-4 weeks away from resuming. So that was the main reason, really. And nobody was really able to come up with a fair solution for how these tests should be paid. Initially, the EFL said they would pay for it from central funds. But then clubs turned around and said, well, hang on, we're going to need that money in 2-3 months' time when we're not getting season card revenue, because we're not playing. So that was the key issue. And in terms of delay, I think it was kind of alluded to before, and I think it's absolutely right. I think the EFL have done this process deliberately, so at the end they can turn around to clubs and say everyone has had the opportunity to put their views forward, to put proposals forward, to have their say on what happens next, and it's been democratically voted on by all clubs. Because if you do that, then it significantly reduces the chances of a club being able to have a successful legal action against you afterwards. That's more my view than anything else, but I do think that's the main reason why the voting process has been so drawn out, because they can now turn around and say, well, everyone's had a chance to put their views forward. But yeah, fundamentally the difference between the Championship and League One was the cost of testing. That was the single biggest issue, and the one that nobody could get round.
I'm guessing then. I could probably read between the lines from what you've said, but let's say that the EFL had just said, right, you do have to restart. Everyone's got to play. I'm guessing that financially would have been catastrophic for the vast majority of teams in the league Sunderland are in.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, to make a judgment on individual clubs' financial situation without kind of seeing their books or what have you. But I think this was one of kind of the key debates that was going on for a while as well, because the costs of playing behind closed doors were quite easy to assess because people could work out how much it would cost to put the tests in place, how much they would lose from not having supporter revenue, so season card refunds, etc., etc. But what nobody ever has been able to really get the bottom of is, will there be a rebate to the broadcasters? Because clubs could have to pay money back to Sky and all the other broadcasters. So I think there's still some pretty major financial implications potentially coming down the track, regardless of the decision not to resume. But I don't think the EFL were ever going to take the stance that they would force a resumption, because all the way through, and a lot of managers, chief executives, chairmen have raised similar points to the ones we have now, which is to say, why doesn't the EFL just make a decision? Why doesn't it appoint someone to make the decision? Well, the EFL's response from day one, rightly or wrongly, from Chairman Rick Parry and other board members has been, well, the clubs are the EFL. The EFL exists solely for the clubs. The clubs, do make up the EFL, and therefore they were always insistent it would have to be the club's decision. So they would never have imposed a restart when, as was pretty clear from early on in League One, the case, the numbers just weren't there to get back playing.
No, definitely not. I think when we had Kieran Maguire on the podcast, he told us about the chasm in revenue between Sunderland and virtually everybody else in the division, the 22 teams. So I think maybe, it would have been very selfish from our perspective, perhaps, to think, right, well, a restart would be fine. For Sunderland, possibly, maybe. But then for everybody else, categorically no. But I think that's probably a good time to move on, speaking of Sunderland. So obviously, I think now would be a good time to talk about the Sunderland season then, because it has obviously officially come to an end. It's done. We're not playing any more of League One football in the 2019-20 season. It is done. And obviously it's going to be done on a very sour, disappointing note if you're a Sunderland fan. So I suppose the question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to start with you, John, is who takes the blame for Sunderland finishing in what is now their lowest position in the club's history, which of course topped last season, and then that of course topped the season, matched the season before. So yeah, who do you think is to blame?
Why do you keep giving me these?
Surely this one's a bit easier than the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general consensus, the general sort of easy answer is that the owners, Charlie Stewart and the guys that are in charge have been majorly responsible. The way they've run the club, the way the transfer's been made. I know that they'll have reasons. I mean, from a business point of view and from a playing the game point of view, there's always a reason why you make these decisions, hopefully. But it's a case of the buck stops with them. They've said it themselves in the pods. They're in charge. The buck stops with them. They want to be successful, and they want the success to be from the work that they've done. And ultimately, we haven't been successful. So, the responsibility lies with them. I think there's obviously a little bit of form, but who do you blame for form? You can't blame the players, or can you blame the players? There's all that question about, career-minded players who aren't necessarily out for the team, and how we've had bad eggs in the past and groups of players that aren't really playing for the team selections, managers, and should we have got rid of Jack Ross? Should we have not get it? There's loads of questions there. But yeah, succinct answer for you. The buck stops with the owners, obviously, because it has to be. They've said that from the start themselves. I don't like to lay blame on anyone for anything, really. I'm a nice guy underneath all of this, but really it's all John McLaughlin's fault.
Well, that's that. No, let's go to you now, Dave. So with obviously what John's touching on there with performances, I mean, naturally, no matter, you can obviously go to the hierarchy like John has right at the top, but the fact of the matter is that Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven aren't kicking the ball on the pitch, and to a certain extent, you've got to look at the players and think where your performance is good enough. Where have you seen the weaknesses in the team this season?
Well, going back to your original question, if I may, whose fault is it? I think it's the fans' fault.
Right.
I am joking.
Well, I thought as much, but I was just wondering how many seconds you'd leave that to hang. The fans, the fan listening, you are to blame.
I think that there was times last season where you felt like a lot of the squad were playing for the shirt, for a period of time. Obviously, it petered out and didn't end the season well. But I remember in the first half of the season, the bar was really low, of course, from seasons previous to that, with all the various mercenary players and substandard performances from individuals and from the team. So to see a team fighting a little bit in previous season, you thought, oh, we might be onto something here. This season, barring the odd little surge, it's just been awful. And I think I agree that the buck stops with the owners, and I'm sure the owners themselves would agree that the buck stops with them. So ultimately, I think the recruitment's been underwhelming, to be kind, really. And I also think it's easy to forget the huge distraction of potential takeovers. I think took the eye off the ball in terms of proper preparation for the season. I think that's a major factor. And it's unforgivable, really, when you look at the last comparable club to us who had benefited of some parachute payments in this league. It was back in, I think it was 2013-14 season when Wolves went up. So they had parachute payments. They bounced back up. They won the league with record points total. They had an average gate of 20,000. It was the first time they've been in the third tier since the late 80s. There's lots of similarities there, apart from the going up bit.
Yeah.
So they romped the league because they wanted to, reinvest and they wanted to get back up there. And obviously they had the parachute payments to do that. And I just think the fact that we've had 2 seasons with such greater income than anyone else, such big gates than anyone else, arguably should have had much more ambition than the vast majority of the other clubs. It feels criminal that we're still here, regardless of how the season's ended.
Yeah, there's no other way of looking at it, Dave. That's 3 seasons in League One, and again, I mean, you draw your comparison. You couldn't have said it any better there. Really, the most fitting comparison is Wolves, who came down in virtually exactly the same fashion. If I'm not mistaken, they were relegated in back-to-back seasons. They totally plummeted from the top, and they were able to take what they were given and they propelled themselves back up. And again, that doesn't. It's really. I'm honest with you. I know it's not very good for the remit of being podcast host, but I am fairly lost for words when I consider just how sort of far apart those 2 situations are. It's quite horrendous. But I don't remember whether it was you or John, actually, Dave, but one of you mentioned their recruitment and about having a rebuild, because a rebuild is most certainly on the cards. A lot of Sunderland players will be out of contract come the summer, come from effectively now. Really, a lot of Sunderland players will no longer be Sunderland players because they'll either not be offered a new deal or they'll turn down whatever they are given, if indeed they are given anything. How much do we trust the current recruitment team to, rebuild again?
Sorry, is that for me? Sorry.
That's for anyone. Sorry, I should really specify. Anyone can take that if they want. Don't be shy.
It almost feels secondary in terms of looking at the squad. I almost haven't got the stomach to think about recruitment and how we're going to build for next season, because I feel like the whole ownership thing needs to be resolved first. Now, that might be almost impossible in the world we're in at the moment, and that isn't anyone's fault, obviously. So I think it's hard to focus on the things we should be focusing on as football fans around this, and a bit of a rally call you might want from fans. But it feels like there's so much else going on that it's almost, sadly, very much secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just sort of adding on to that, I think, playing devil's advocate, adding a sort of positive swing. Maybe, I know we've said this the last couple of seasons when we've been losing players that have been on big wages because they've come to end of contract, so we've managed to move them on even though we're still paying some of them. Maybe this whole kind of clear out agenda or what's happening in the future with the squad being cleared a little bit. I'm not being realistic when I say this, and I'm fully aware of it, but maybe it's a big opportunity to bring in some players if the recruitment goes well. Now, if the recruitment goes well is another non-realistic perception, really, based on the past couple of seasons and the recruitment we've had, and if that's the team that are recruiting these players and that's their doing, and there's that laying fault completely with them, I'm sure they'll have lots of excuses as to why and why they weren't able to recruit the best players for what we're doing, or they thought that they were going to be the best players, but ultimately trying to take a more idealistic point of view, there's going to be a lot of free agents about, from other clubs, and we talked about it a little bit today in our little groups, on WhatsApp and stuff. And it's a case of, you look at other clubs who've got top players falling out of contract because of the situation. And whilst it's a negative situation, it's hard to concentrate on that. the people behind the club, and I'm sure the people behind other clubs, will be looking at how they can mop up those players, how they can get in touch with them now and start turning this into an opportunity and try and get them involved into the new season and building a squad around certain decent players. Now, if they're not doing that, and if we aren't doing that kind of tactic, as harsh as it sounds to sort of be taking advantage of the situation like that, we are going to fall behind again, and that's the really, really worrying thing. And also, kind of, if we're not doing that, and kind of all the other teams are, we're still supposedly the biggest draw in League One. Are we going to see players that we're supposedly linked with go into Doncaster, go into whoever else is still in this league? Are we going to see them mopping up these players that actually really should be playing at the Stadium of Light? Top level players for this level, if that makes sense. And I'm sorry, but this is the third season of that potentially happening. The first season down, we had some excuses with the fact that we just couldn't manage the wage bill to bring in decent players. Little excuses here and there to bring in decent players. This season, again, there was the odd excuse from Stuart and the ownership about why we couldn't pay X amount of money. Then out of nowhere, he's chucking 4 million at Will Grigg. So really now, potentially, quite a lot of the teams and clubs in this league are on an even keel. We're losing a lot of players, they're all out of contract, and they're all available. So treating it like an American sports draft, surely we've got an opportunity here to, if we can recruit properly, we can get a decent team out of this. So
yeah, I think that's a very good analogy, John, an American sports draft. Yeah, with a lot of players going, I'd imagine a lot of clubs will be in a similar scenario where players will be running down contracts, and obviously amid there being something of a drought financially, there'll be a lot of players sort of just like on Bosman's going to and from other clubs in sort of like a smash and grab of who can you get. But I suppose that's a question for you, Phil, if you don't mind. Do you expect that, as we currently speak now, that this is resolved, that the powers that be at Sunderland are moving however they see fit to basically keep players at the squad, move some players on, have a look at who they could bring in? Do you expect that the transfer activity is being planned and meditated now?
Well, you'd certainly hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I think I would, before I kind of go on to it more generally, what I would say is I think all clubs will be looking to make decisions, but I think you probably have to acknowledge as well that a lot of clubs will wait until they know when the new season's going to start before they realistically start adding players to their squads. Because if clubs are going to be potentially looking at playing behind closed doors for 3 months, then their budget might be a lot smaller. I'm not speaking specifically to Sunderland there. I just mean across the game, I don't think it's quite as easy as teams will now go, right, bang, who are we going to go out and buy? I think they'll be waiting a little bit longer just to see what next season might look like. But in terms of Sunderland, you would certainly hope that this is an opportunity now to go out and get good players and to rebuild. I think the summer was always going to kind of be a natural turnover because, as we know, the summer that came down from the Championship, a lot of players signed 2 years. I always kind of looked at the summer and thought, well, you either get promoted and therefore you look at it as you have to kind of have a bit of refresh of the squad to compete in the Championship, or you've had 2 seasons and you feel like go up. So you need to have another go, right? Because clearly what you've had is not working. But, that's where, I guess that's kind of where the concern for the club and a lot of supporters have at the moment is because we're 2 years on now since the new owners came in, and I don't think many people have a huge amount of faith in the recruitment structures they've put in place. We all know that the academy has had an unbelievably difficult season. A lot of good players have gone from the under-18, under-23 age groups. So you don't really have those players from those age groups knocking on the door. You've got Denver Hume, Linda Gooch, Elliot Emblen, fantastic. But where's the next kind of group of those players? And you probably don't have a huge amount of faith from what we've seen in the last 3-4 windows that they could go out and find these gems who'll be available on a free from other clubs. Hopefully I'm proved wrong, but that's kind of where the concern is. And ultimately it comes back to the ownership. You mentioned before to the other guys about where the blame for this season lies. Well, for me, the buck stops with the owners, and that's particularly the case in this season. You go back to last summer and you set a target for 100 points, but then your manager can't sign any players for 4 to 6 weeks. He thinks he's getting new owners, and then the new ownership never happens. So he's starting the season with a weaker squad than he had last year, but being told to get 15 more points. I mean, how does that work? And it's always felt to me, I mean, I've been following Sunderland all my life, but I've been doing this job specifically for about 3.5 years now, and it's always felt like Sunderland are just living from window to window. Let's get the next window, see who's available. I've never felt like, okay, this is the structure that Sunderland are trying to follow. And I think to me, this season has just felt like, I suppose the last 2 seasons in a way, but specifically this season, it's just felt like such a waste because this opportunity to reset, learn the lessons from why we got to this place and have another go. I just don't really see what's there. I don't really see what the recruitment strategy is, what they're trying to achieve. I don't see these academy players, unfortunately, kind of banging on the door aside from the ones who are already there. So, yeah, in a theoretical world, you look at this and think, okay, there's an opportunity here to go out and recruit well, bring the wage bill down, because I'm sure that wages will be a lot lower this summer. But I guess the reason why we're having this discussion and the reason why we're all uncertain about the summer ahead and the months ahead is because, unfortunately, a lot's been talked about and a lot of targets have been set and a lot of promises been made. But what we have at the moment is not really great.
Just to jump in there, I think, bang on, Bill. When the owners first came in, there was talk of a Dortmund model, and mentioned that there were a few people like Army and others, and just saying you would like to have a Dortmund model doesn't mean you have a Dortmund model. There was talk about a lot of fans just felt when you reviewed where every action, forget what they said, every action they took was one of short-termism. There's no long-term plan. Now, speculate as to why that might be, but that's just look through what they've done. There's nothing that suggests building something. It's been about cutting costs, which is absolutely fair enough, 100% fair enough to do that. We were in a mess, and what anyone wants to say about the owners, I've never envied them taking up the mess that they did. However, did, and it feels like we still have problems. So if you look at the minutes of, if you're nerdy enough like me, to either be involved with or to read the minutes of the Red White Army meetings with the club, you'll see in the latest, I was going to say more recent, but it's a while ago now that we've had the structured dialogue meetings. But back in the last year, when we were talking through finances, we were, matter of record, that we were looking still at a gap of around about £10 million between the operating costs of the club and revenue, and we still have some parachute payments coming in then to screw that gap as they come in instalments. But I don't know what the latest situation is, but it is a worry that if that gap hasn't been closed even more significantly, there is still that significant gap in finances. That's probably the greatest challenge of all in terms of building a squad that can swagger out of League One next season.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. You see, I look at it and I feel like I try to digest what you're both saying, but like my brain just hits this wall of just negativity. I mean, I can't. You know what it is? I'm sat here and I'm going to say what I think a lot of people wouldn't want to hear, like a fellow Sunderland fan say, just because no one wants to really think along those lines. But I can't even see them going up next season either, because I don't understand how they are supposed to turn what they've got here into a club successful enough to get promotion from this division. I mean, ultimately, you look at it. First of all, Phil spoke about there, the Academy Elite. Obviously, that's fallen into what is, I would call, nothing less than disrepair. It is an absolute state. You've got no one coming through. Your Denver Hume and your Elliot Embleton and your Lyndon Gooch, they are the last of what you can possibly expect to see in a Sunderland shirt next season, because, quite frankly, all of the young talent that was coming through, an entire generation of it, has gone. Add to that the fact that, obviously, half the team is going to be out of contract. You're then going to have to bring in, let's say 2 digits worth of players again, 10, 11, 12. And you're going to have to do that with an even smaller budget than you had the first time you did a rebuild in League One, because obviously this is our first season without the Premier League money trickling down. So we're now, I would imagine, in a situation where with a thinner wage budget and a thinner transfer budget, if any at all, we are going to need to restock a team with one that can apparently challenge for automatic promotion. With the current recruitment team, with Tony Courton and Richard Hill being the only two people operating, I cannot see that happen, not given the track record that they've had so far. There's no infrastructure, there's no sort of youth progression or youth policy. There isn't anything that resembles, to me, a substantial transfer ethos, let alone the Dortmund model. So I've got literally no idea how this is supposed to turn around. I would love for one of you to be at least slightly more positive than me. So I don't know how much more negative I can get, but that's just how I feel right now. I just think it's such a... I wouldn't even say it's a mess. I wouldn't say it's a mess, because I think a mess implies that there's nothing there. There is something there. Just what we are right now is mediocre. We are bang average by League One standards, given how the club is run on a day-to-day basis from its infrastructure. I just think it's really mediocre. Not a mess. We've been upgraded from mess to mediocre.
The one positive is that we'll not be allowed to go and watch it for a while.
Yeah, that's it. I can pretend. It's like that thing, isn't it? It's like Schrodinger's stadium. If I'm not there, the football's not happening.
Yes, very true. No, I mean, just touching on it all, what you guys just said, I'm not going to be positive. I don't think there's anything to be positive about. But the Dortmund model or lessons to be learned. Like, what more is there to be learned, and what more is there? What you've had enough time to put in a structure and a model. Like, in my opinion, like, I know there's been, you know, this sort of plan of selling and what have you, but for me, when they first took over, we're in League One. Surely, and we know now this didn't happen, but surely if you did that, you go, right, Wolves did it. A number of other teams have done it quite recently, where they've dropped down a couple of leagues, they've dropped down to League One. How did they get back up so quickly? What did they do to make that happen? And you just try and implement that. Forget your Dortmund model. Forget taking time to learn the league and learn lessons of how we can do this a different way because of our wage bill, etc., etc. You just try and implement as much as possible. Frankly, what's happened is Stuart's come in. He's brought in Richard Hill, who he knows from previous roles and previous, lower leagues kind of roles, and he's tried to. They've tried to balance the books, which again, you know, like Dave said, I echo what he said. I don't envy them at all. They've had a big job on the hand, and they've probably done a pretty good job at that. But like Dave said, there's probably a lot we don't know about what they've done within the structures, the revenues of the club. But what they haven't done is found that winning structure, that model that works, you know. And we've talked about Wolves, talked about other teams, you know. It sounds stupid, but it's as simple as that, to try that. Instead, we've seen something completely different. We've seen rash decisions, we've seen arguments and ups and downs and changes of facts that are supposedly facts, you know, changing their mind what they actually said, and it's frankly, like, just to add to the despair, it's just, I'm pretty sure every Sunderland fan's had enough of the sort of drama that's surrounded it all, and does just want to get back to it, you know, as kind of normal as normality can be. But how that's going to happen and what that means for the third season in League One, I don't know, because I've got to echo what you said, Alex. I want to say that we'll be all right, but I don't think we'll get promoted this season. I don't think the bookies are going to be able to pick favourites from any league this season with what's gone on right now with coronavirus hitting all the clubs, you know. So,
well, we went officially 48 minutes without mentioning the coronavirus. That's pretty good. Well done, John.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, John, do you have any faith in the recruitment team to get it right next season? Just
no.
Honest, just no. Okay, no. Fair enough.
I don't. To be fair, the only faith I'd have is if they were probably a bit more transparent. And I know that's a bit unheard of, but you know how Stuart talks about his transparency before he went black, you know, before he went sort of dark and didn't want to talk to us anymore. If they're gonna have the pelters they've had for 2 seasons now of poor signings, why not just come out and talk? Why not have Richard Hill or Tony come out and chat about their recruitment strategy and why they've bought the players they've bought? What is the plans for the youth structures? You know, get Paul Reed back on if he's still hanging around, you know, and stuff like that, and just have a bit of transparency. It felt like, I know it was a while ago, but it felt like that pod where Charlie and Paul were on. Charlie was just stopping him from saying what he really wanted to say, Paul Reed, about the academy, and it was just a case of, you know, this isn't transparency. This isn't what we want to hear. I think maybe not everybody, but I think some Sunderland fans at least would appreciate the reasons why things have happened and the explanations of why this business is being run this way. Because let's be honest, they're running it like a business. You know, they're not thinking of fans ever, really, despite the fact that they're saying it. They're not thinking about what the fans want. They're not thinking about how to succeed on the pitch. They're thinking about how to run the club far too much, in my opinion. And obviously, you know, there'll be lots of people out there who will add to what I've said there and say that they're really only thinking about flipping the club. They're only really thinking about how they can make a profit on the club. Now, I'm not sure I'd stick my name on that because I don't know the ins and outs, but if people are going to give me a decent argument for that, then I'll stick with it. But personally speaking, all I want to know is the decisions why, the transparency behind it all. But as far as your question goes, absolutely not. Zero faith. How can you have faith in a recruitment team that have done that over the last couple of years? You know, at all. Yeah, and I think to reiterate again, they're going to have the same task as they did in the first season in League One, but with less money than they had that time. So I just, you know, again, I mean, I look at the recruitment. I look at the players that were recruited. I mean, you know, rightly or wrongly, on a moral standpoint, the documentary
Sunderland Till I Die sort of cast a lot of light on the mentality of those players that were signed. You look at Baldwin, for example. You look at Charlie Wyke. You look at the nature of those signings. 900k on Charlie Wyke with his 15 goals for Bradford in League Two. You look at Jack Baldwin, who just looked like the battle was lost from day one. He just looked terrified to have signed for Sunderland. My fear is that we're going to make the same mistakes, but on a budget, which means that we sign even worse players.
I think what we speak about due diligence with regards to running clubs, and I don't think the recruitment team do their due diligence on players. You talked about a couple of signings there. Can you honestly think that anyone with half a brain would sign Jack Baldwin? Nice bloke, but if you meet him, sit down with him, learn more about him, find out what makes him tick, find out all the kind of ins and outs of it all, speak to previous owners, speak to previous coaches, get the proper detail, not just stats on a bit of paper, or not just somebody saying, oh yeah, he's an half decent player, a mate of a mate, or going to watch him a couple of times. Get a full dossier. If you do full due diligence on players, then fair play. The decisions have been made from the proper science behind it. And that's where you're lacking in a recruitment team. I can't see where any of the players they've brought in, maybe one or two here and there, where they've actually done the due diligence, unless they've just got really lucky. They've just genuinely got really lucky once or twice, maybe Luke and I don't know, they've just got lucky with the player. But
just one thing I want to add is we talk about recruitment team and we say that implies a large number of people involved in the decision-making process. And we know for a fact that in the first season in League One, that wasn't the case. I'm not being kind of funny there, or that's just a factor. And, the investment we know was in those scouting networks, and the recruitment team just wasn't there. I mean, I think the situation's slightly improved now, but that's what these things comes down to. And that's where I think the concerns are going forward, and the things that really have to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very pertinent point there, Phil. I mean, if we look at the infrastructure of the club, is there any way? I suppose, Phil, we'll go back to you. What is it that the club lacks as far as infrastructure goes that prevents it from being a club that gets promoted?
Well, I just think we all understand that the owners inherited a situation where they had to cut costs and save money, and I can understand that. But in the long term, you have to invest to a degree as well to get returns. Investing in players who you can potentially sell on down the line, investing in your academy team so you have players in who 1 year, 2 years you can either sell to clubs below you or can push into your team. I think so. We mentioned the Sunderland Till I Die. I mean, I think that showed to everybody that there isn't a particularly great decision-making structure in place. We've seen decisions made from different places. Managers finding out about decisions after they've been made in terms of transfers, what have you. I don't think there's anything malicious in that. I just don't think the structures are in place to make good, efficient decisions. And I'm not sure the structures have been in place in some key departments where you can make really good long-term strategies. To me, when I first started doing this job and having kind of followed the team in the previous years, it always felt like Sunderland were just hoping to get lucky. Or at some point we'll stumble across the manager who's the messiah, and we'll go on a run, and some point we'll have a window where we get the right players in. And I suppose there have been some things that have kind of made us hope that might be possible, such as Big Sam, in that January window where he did get the players in. But I just think, and one of my biggest disappointments is that even having come down to League One, and even having seen what that meant going down that route in the Premier League, those lessons don't really seem to learn. As to me, this has been a club that has still looked like it's just hoping to get lucky, that it somehow has a window that massively pays off and someone comes in and scores 15, 20 goals. I just don't think football works like that. I think you have to, you need stability at boardroom level, and you need people, on Sunderland day to day, whose job, kind of full time and full focus is on making these decisions so that you can make proper long-term decisions to the benefit of the club.
Well, Phil, I don't mind, but it's very funny. A lot of what you said there sounds an awful lot like the same short-termism you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Then that's what I mean. I just, I think everyone understands that Sunderland cannot spend absolute fortunes in League One, and they can't have a worldwide network of 50 scouts. I think everyone understands that just isn't feasible. But surely you shouldn't be in a position where your rivals seem to have, for example, better connections with the big Premier League clubs, so they get the pick of the loan players. We've seen in some of Sunderland's competitors bringing in excellent young loan players from Premier League clubs. Sunderland don't seem to have been able to do that. There have been some successes in recruitment. Jordan Willis picked up on a free, young, superb defender who, if Sunderland wanted to tomorrow, they could sell him for a big profit. But I think the fact that that's the exception rather than the rule tells you where they're going wrong, because there hasn't been enough of that. And if there hasn't been enough of that, then I just don't think it's because those structures are in place. And I do think what that documentary showed us is something a lot of us argued for a long time, was that there just wasn't enough day-to-day leadership, and that kind of structure of leadership wasn't there. We hope that when Jim Rodwell's able to come to Sunderland, that might help a little bit and be there every day and liaise with people. We wait and see. It's kind of too early to tell, isn't it? But yeah, I think that's something that's just been lacking. And again, my overarching feeling now is kind of frustration that I feel this opportunity for the club to reset a little bit over the last 2 years is, for me, it's been wasted. And I think that's a real shame. It still feels to me like a club that, isn't necessarily set up for success and is hoping that at some point it kind of gets lucky. And as we've seen from the last 10 years, maybe it'll happen for a short period at some time, but I don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah, Sunderland don't get lucky. Sunderland getting lucky is Victor Onichebe on a free scoring 3 goals in his first 2 games. That's the extent to which Sunderland get lucky. Sunderland don't get lucky. So I suppose one final question for today, and I have to, I'm afraid, end on probably the sourest of the sour notes, because that is the general feel of this podcast, and that's going to sit with the owners. Has Donald and Co. lost the confidence of the fan base entirely? We'll ask you, Dave. Do you think that is the case? Do you think there are people in the fan base who will still back them, or do you think it's generally the case that the fans don't feel that they have any faith left in the hierarchy?
Well, I can only go by the emails we receive at Red White Army from members and from taking the temperature on social media, which can be a dangerous thing to do because you can end up in echo chamber, so you've got to be aware of that. However, I have never known the fans to be so united. Disappointment and frustration at how that's been handled, and obviously it's come on the back of the leaked draft accounts story for Sunderland and made the move that they did, especially in the initial first statement or two. First of all, it was just baffling. A lot of fans have been telling us about the tone was unusual. Just going off feedback that we've had, that some would suggest it was almost like passive aggressive in its nature, and then the actual content itself. You don't have to look very far to see, dare I say, what good looks like for clubs. You look at Derby, Leeds, Portsmouth, and how they've communicated what they're doing about renewals and refunds, and how they've actually written to the season ticket holders as well and contacted them directly. Which just none of that's happened, and it's really sad. And it also feels like it's indicative of a lack of appetite from the ownership now. But that's just all from the feedback that we've had. That's what fans are telling us, and you'll have all seen yourselves looking at social media and what we've read in sort of the local press. It's just fans are seeing with their feet a little bit as well. There's a lot saying that they're cancelling. I think it's great that the club have kept it open that you retain your seat, loyalty points. That's really good. It's great that they've made the U-turn on the refund for those that had already purchased next season's tickets, but also for those that who had been playing behind closed doors would have still been eligible for refunds. That's good. But I think they'd already shown the hand, and I think a lot of fans are unforgiving on that.
I don't. There's one thing I never want to do as a Sunderland fan. I never want to be against the people who are in charge of the club. I never want that. And I never want to dislike a manager. I never want to dislike players. I never want to dislike owners. And, I don't dislike them. I know it's not personal. Well, it is, but it isn't, I suppose, if that makes any sense. I don't feel any confidence or any faith in them at all. No, I don't. I think everything that they've done has been done wrong, especially in recent times. I think every decision that's been made has ultimately culminated in what is complete abject failure at this moment in time. And because of that, I don't see any real positivity in the near future. I don't. I'd love to be proven wrong, and I'm wrong quite a lot in other avenues of life. So if I'm wrong in this one, fantastic. Cannot wait. But I suppose we'll leave it there for today. So one final question, lads. Shall we just aim for 100 points next season for a laugh?
Let's do the Invincibles. Let's see if we can do an Arsenal Invincibles and just win every game.
Yeah, the League One Arsenal. That's going to be us.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, no, maybe not. Anyway, well, thank you very much for listening to the ROKER Report podcast. I've been your host, Alex McCain, and thank you, Dave from Red and White Army, for joining us.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it. Thanks for asking me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Phil from the Echo.
Thanks. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problemo. And thank you, John, also from the ROKER Report.
Thank you very much, Alex.
No problemo. So, yeah, hopefully, in spite of all the negativity we've had, things do pick up in the future. And as soon as there is something positive to shout about, you can bet that we will be jumping on our mics wherever we may be to Inject some positivity to counterbalance the negativity. Let's try, eh? Thank you very much and good night.